AUN, American Underground Network.
The following live recording is an AUN special presentation. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome again to a monthly broadcast that we're doing with a special guest, hummux in California, and 9/11 researcher, and been doing a lot of, he's a producer and video editor and of many 9/11 films, and will be hosting today's conference. And also our guest is Christopher Bolin, who is the famous former researcher and former journalist with American Free Press from Washington, D.C., who's been covering 9/11 stories and articles since the day it actually happened in 2001. And Christopher is an accomplished, as well as a journalist, but an author. He has two very informative books, Solving 9/11, The Deception That Changed the World, and a sister publication that goes along with that book, Solving 9/11, the Original Articles. And the first book, of course, is Deception That Changed the World. And I encourage everyone to please go to Bolin, BOLLYN.com, and order Chris's books. That's the best way to actually understand and have proof of what happened. It's all documented. And so with that, and our guest that's on TalkShoe while this has been simulcast, I turn it over to our host from California, hummux.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. I really appreciate the work you're doing and that AUN is doing to make it possible for us to do this communication with Christopher, because he's really the leading edge of solving 9/11. Christopher, welcome to the show, and I think we just start right out with your newest article, "The Revolution Begins with 9/11." Let's hear what you've got to say.
Okay, well, thank you, hummux. My most recent article is called "The Revolution Begins with 9/11 Truth," and I wrote that because I was working on several other leads, smaller detailed articles about what happened in Shanksville or this person or that person, and then I realized that going and delving into the details of what happened on 9/11 is not really the important thing at this point. Furthermore, I've presented my material to audiences around America and Europe, and the question that I always get at the end is people say, well, what do we do now? What do we do with this? What do we do with this material? What do we do with this information? Where do we go from here? And I get it every place I go, I get this question. It's inevitable. So I decided to turn to that question. And of course, when people ask me that, I always say the same thing. I usually tell them that the important thing is to share the information, read the books, understand that we've been deceived about 9/11, think about that, and then when you understand that, then share that information with your family and your friends and your colleagues, because you have to share this information with other people, because we live in a deceived nation, we live in a deceived world. Most people, a lot of people are not understanding that much about what happened on 9/11, but at the same time, by the same token, we do know that a very, very large percentage of the American population does not believe the official version, but they don't really know the details. They don't understand really what happened, and so they can't move much further from that position. So I wrote this article, and like I said, first I tell people to spread the word, and then because you have to have understanding before you take action. You can't go out and take action on something if you don't really understand, what happened, who deceived us, who's behind the deception, and who are the guilty parties. And there's a lot of, I've been thinking about this 9/11 since, since it happened, basically, and it's been a very strange path. But when you think about it a lot, a certain logical sequence follows. And that sequence, of course, is that we have been woefully deceived about what happened on 9/11. And the partners, the main partners in that deception, as it relates to us, are the U.S. government, our official, government in Washington and city of New York, for that matter, and then also the media. And these two entities, the government and the media, have basically been complicit in a huge deception against the American people and the world since 9/11. Well, what does that mean? That means that our government is basically in cahoots with the people who pulled off 9/11 because they have protected the guilty parties. The guilty parties of 9/11 have been protected. The lies have been protected, and we have been snookered into two illegal wars of aggression in Afghanistan and Iraq based on these lies. Well, what does that tell us about our relationship to our government? That tells us that our government is not serving the people at all. In fact, the government is working against the people. The government is working against the interests of the American people. It's working against the American Republic, and it's working against our well-being and our welfare. Well, I mean, that obviously means that our government is working in collaboration with the guilty parties, and that this government has perpetuated a train of abuses, a long train of abuses, like it says in the Declaration of Independence, and it has conspired to put us under absolute despotism, which means that we are like the forefathers of the American forefathers who wrote the Declaration of Independence. We are suffering under a despotic government, and it means that 9/11 truth is the pivotal event upon which American history will turn. Either we will 9/11 truth will prevail, and there will be arrests and investigations and prosecutions of the guilty, or it will continue as it has thus far, and the guilty parties of 9/11 will be able to continue their war agenda and take us, the nation and the world, into more calamitous wars, and God knows what will happen then. So it's like it is the pivot of the revolution. It has to change. It cannot go on. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to have a government that openly lies to the American people about such a calamitous event. 3,000 people murdered in broad daylight, and for now almost 14 years, 13 and a half years, the government has been complicit in a complete deception and protected the guilty parties. So, it doesn't mean that you just have to run out and get your guns and start shooting people, because you can't. That's not the way to go. But to understand that 9/11 truth is the essence of the revolution that is going to happen, that has to happen in America, is very important.
Well, you got that right, Christopher. I think the work you've done has just, your companion book that has the articles in it is almost a day-by-day compendium of the dirty tricks that were being played. So with those two books, people have really got to get into the depth of what's going on. The thing that I'm toying with is solving 9/11 task forces, where we look at this as the murder mystery that it is, and we encourage people to post and put up stuff where the problems have been solved, where we know what the answers are, and where we know where the government is lying to us, and get that information out. More and more people are aware of complicity of our own government.
Yeah, the complicity is very clear when you talk about what happened post 9/11. I mean, when you talk about the cover-up, the destruction of evidence, the obstruction of justice, in the people who prevented an investigation from happening. I mean, that's one thing that people have to understand. You hear architects and engineers and other people calling for a new 9/11 investigation, not understanding that there never was a 9/11 investigation in the first place. There was no criminal investigation. Rather than investigate the crime scene and the, where 3,000 people were killed in New York City, for example, the evidence was all put on the fast train for destruction. It was taken away from the site, and it was being cut up into small pieces 24/7 at these two junkyards in New Jersey, and it was being mixed with other scrap, intentionally mixed with other scrap, and then sent to Asia for melting down. I mean, this was around-the-clock destruction of evidence. But we know who's behind that. We know who's responsible for that. We know the parties. I named them in my book. First and foremost, I would say Michael Chertoff, because he was the person, the Assistant Attorney General, who was supposed to investigate the crimes of 9/11. And some people will criticize me for not pointing the finger firstly at George Bush and Dick Cheney. But George Bush and Dick Cheney are definitely complicit in massive, massive crimes. For example, waging a war of aggression, conspiring to wage a war of aggression in Iraq, and other things. But when you talk about 9/11 complicity, George Bush was not supposed to investigate 9/11. You can fault George Bush and Dick Cheney for not establishing a blue ribbon investigation on day one. That's legitimate criticism. But when you talk about who's actually involved in the actual cover-up of evidence and non-investigation, you have to look at the appointed officials. Okay, he was appointed by George Bush, but people like Michael Chertoff and, of course, John Ashcroft. These were the two characters at the Department of Justice who completely failed the American people by completely failing to do what they're supposed to do, and that is to investigate 9/11.
Yeah, that's pretty clear by now. It's the part I love is that they were able to release back to Israel without any questioning or any comment the largest espionage ring that had ever been discovered in America. So there was a lot of stuff going on that was kept from the American people that would not have been tolerated if we had known about it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I want to get a perspective from you on the European conference that you were recently at. And what's the difference in the way that the Europeans react to 9/11 now and 5 years ago? You've been talking to them over there for a number of years.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. There was a conference in Holland called the Open Mind Conference 2015 in the Netherlands, and there have been Open Mind conferences prior to that in Denmark. It's a Danish thing, and a guy named Frank Rasmussen, who's an expert on chemtrails, he has hosted these Open Mind conferences, and this one was done in Holland by a former KLM pilot. He organized this one, and it was very interesting because I was one of the speakers, and also Ken O'Keefe, and the pilot who arranged this conference. He got the idea to arrange it after I had been not allowed. I had been detained at Heathrow Airport last January when I went to meet Ken O'Keefe. I was going to be on a little TV program with Ken O'Keefe. He's like a Palestinian activist. He was on the flotilla that went to Gaza a few years ago, and he was beaten up by the Israelis. And so he's a very outspoken American guy, a veteran of the first war in Iraq, the Gulf War invasion of 1991. And then there was Ian Crane was another speaker, and Frank Rasmussen was a speaker, and there was one more. But the thing was, we were 5 speakers, I think, altogether. And we talked about things from chemtrails to conspiracies to Palestine and Israel, and my speech about 9/11 truth. And what happened was, there was a newspaper, the biggest newspaper in Amsterdam, which is the biggest city in Holland. A week before the event came, they wrote a piece where they tried to portray me as being first a anti-Semite, and then calling me a Holocaust denier, and using these kinds of terms. It was quite libelous. Their charge was a libel, and they wanted to scare us, scare the organizer into basically canceling the event. And what happened, though, is that we were going to speak at this old school building in Amsterdam, but that building is owned by a political party, and it's next door to a synagogue. And the synagogue was able to get that venue to basically disallow us, to disadmit us. And so, in the few days, like a week before the conference, we had to find a new venue, and we had to do it in another town. So this is pretty extreme. I'm looking for a lawyer who can help me with a libel case, because this newspaper is called Het Parool, very clearly committed a libel against me, and it's worth pursuing that. But of course, if you're going to pursue a case like that, you better make sure you have a pretty good lawyer and a good chance of winning. But so the conference went very well, and it was a big success. We had about 150 people. Our venue was only not big enough for 150 people, and it was filled to the brim. And instead of having it a two-day event, we made it a one-day event. It was on June 6th, and it was very successful. Now, how do people in Europe understand 9/11 truth? Well, you have to understand that the media in Europe is just as controlled as it is in America. It's controlled maybe in a little bit different way, but regarding 9/11 truth, you're not going to find very much 9/11 truth written about or talked about on TVs in Europe in the same way that it's not talked about in America. It's like it's the most taboo subject politically in the United States and to a large extent in Europe as well. And I suppose that a lot of Europeans kind of see it as being like an American problem, not understanding that, of course, they're part of the same ball of wax, because these countries, they sent people to Afghanistan. Holland, for example, sent like 2,000 guys over there, and they ran a whole division of people in the middle of Afghanistan, in Kunduz, I think it was, Kunduz, and they lost, 25 people, I think, and they had like 150 injured. So, I mean, these countries have been deceived in the exact same way, and they've been snookered into the same anti-Islamic war that is what we call the war on terrorism. And furthermore, now the very same people who brought us the war in Iraq, like the Kagan family, namely the Kagan or the Kagan family, they've created this crisis in Europe, in Ukraine, which has been now spun into a very dangerous anti-Russian propaganda campaign, which is really, really dangerous, because I'm talking to you from Sweden, and the newspapers here constantly harp on this anti-Russian fear. There was an article just the other day in the paper that said that Russia could take Gotland. It's the island off the coast towards Russia. Russia could take Gotland in 6 hours, and they've been practicing and training to do that. I mean, this is complete nonsense. But what they're doing is that they're trying to say that Russia aggressed Crimea and took Crimea by illegal annexation, which is not true, and that therefore Russia is in this mode where it's going to start taking back pieces of the old Soviet Union, which it has no interest in doing. And so they've pushed this fear in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, etc., all across Eastern Europe, and really put a very dangerous game into effect here. So what I'm saying is that this is the Zionist war agenda. The Kagan family are the people who brought us the war. They wrote this document called the Project for a New American Century, which was basically their baby. And in that group, Donald Kagan, his father, his sons, Frederick and Michael, I think, Robert and Frederick, they're the ones who put this project into effect. And it was in the year 2000, they came out with this paper called Rebuilding America's Defenses, in which they clearly called for a new Pearl Harbor. And basically they said the United States will have to invade and occupy Iraq, whether Saddam Hussein is on the throne or not. That's very important to understand. So it's like this goal of occupying Iraq and establishing an American presence in Iraq was in the cards, whether Saddam Hussein was going to be in power or not. And so, of course, then they spun this whole thing about weapons of mass destruction, which didn't exist, and took us into a war in Iraq, and there you have it. Now, the very same people are behind, it was Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State for Eurasia, is the person who basically created the coup in Kiev in Ukraine. And so, we have this same rotten little Zionist Jewish cabal at the State Department that is conspiring wars of aggression around the world. And it's like, this is what I'm talking about. When we need a revolution in America, because we have to remove these people from power. We have to remove this cabal. We have to remove. Now you ask, well, how did these guys get in power? Well, understanding the Zionist network and how it's infiltrated all levels of our government, and that this is the part that has to be extricated, has to be pulled out, and these people have to be prosecuted for their crimes. I mean, conspiring to wage a war of aggression is the number one war crime. It's the crime against the peace. So not only George Bush and Dick Cheney, but all the people who were part of the conspiring, all the people who were part of the planning, they have to be held accountable. Ashton Carter is one of them. Our current defense secretary is one of them. And so is John Deutsch and a whole host of other people. And all of these people, they belong to an organization. They belong to a network. It's not a network that you see on the surface, but it is a network all the same. And this whole network has to be pulled out of our government. Otherwise, our country will no longer resemble an American republic. It will cease to be a democratic American republic in any sense of the word. And it will become a totalitarian state, which it's very close to being already.
Yeah, I'd say you got that right. I'm interested in how the neocons, when Clinton was in power, they went to work in Israel and did their PNAC work, working for Bibi Netanyahu. And then when Bush got back in power, the neocons moved back into American politics and started doing their stuff over here. Do you have any insights on that?
No, I don't know what they were doing, prior. I know that they belong to this, I think, this group of Trotskyites or something like that, but they're the people who were basically also behind the Cold War. They were part of this anti-Soviet, think tanks at places like Yale and Princeton and whatnot. Donald Kagan is the father. He's a Lithuanian-born Jewish fella, and he was the founder of this Project for a New American Century. But the understanding that 9/11 was the crime of 9/11 was actually planned decades in advance. They really started to plan it seriously in the 1970s, and that means that the setting of the stage was being done in the Clinton administration. The real serious setting of the stage was all being done during the Clinton administration, and that's at the time when Rahm Emanuel was the special advisor to Bill Clinton. You remember, and Rahm Emanuel is a senior Mossad operative. His father, Rahm Emanuel's father, Dr. Benjamin Emanuel, lives in Chicago. He was involved in the Stern Gang, this group called Etzel Lehi. This group was the one that was led by Yitzhak Shamir, the Zionist terrorist from Belarusia, who was involved in the murder of the Swedish Count Folke Bernadotte in 1948, I think it was, in Jerusalem. And this group and Rahm Emanuel's father Benjamin was involved in that little terror group. And then in 1952, I think it was, he went to America with his American wife, American-born Jewish wife, and these Emanuel kids are all very high-level people. One of them, Ari Emanuel, it's Rahm Emanuel's brother, is the agent for Michael Moore. And, just a little side note, you see right now they're making a big deal out of the Confederate flag. Suddenly, the Confederate flag has become toxic. Wait, for 150 years, the Confederate flag's been flying left and right all over the South, and now suddenly they're making issue out of that. And I just read that Michael Moore, a girl climbed up the pole in Columbia, South Carolina, and took down the flag, the Stars and the Bars yesterday. And Michael Moore offered to pay her legal fees and everything. And as I said, Michael Moore's agent is Ari Emanuel. And Michael Moore, if you remember about 9/11, made a movie called Fahrenheit 9/11. in which there was, of course, no mention of any Israeli whatsoever. When Israelis are all over the 9/11 story, when Michael Moore made his story about 9/11, there was no mention of those Israelis. And then his older brother is a big shot at the National Institute of Health on the East Coast. So it's like, well, wow, this is a very successful family. Well, it is a successful family, but there's more to it than that. You have to understand that these people are agents of the power. They're agents of the power that I'm talking about. And so when, you have to ask yourself, why was Rahm Emanuel the special advisor for Bill Clinton? And then when Obama gets elected, suddenly he's named the first appointed person by President Obama was Rahm Emanuel. Amazing, huh? Amazing how this guy is like the wallpaper in the White House during a Democratic presidency. Well, there's a reason for that, because he is like Henry Kissinger. He is a key player in the Zionist network, and that's how these people get advanced. They don't get advanced on their merits. They get advanced because they are dedicated and high-level players of the Zionist power. And that Zionist power is the power that has to be pulled out of our U.S. government, has to be purged. We have to have a purge of our government in the way that, I don't know, not the way Stalin did it, but in the same vein, our government has to be cleansed. Our government has to be purged of all these infiltrators who have a foreign agenda. They're anti-American. The people who are running this Zionist network in the United States of America are anti-American. They are working against the American people and against the American Republic. And I can see that right now what they're going to promote for this upcoming election in 2015 is they're going to play the Civil War all over again. They're going to try to divide Dixie from the North, and suddenly the big issue is the stars and bars. Not the fact that some guy went and shot up the place and killed 12 people down in Charleston. No, the issue is now Dixie and what Dixie stood for and what the Confederacy stood for. And so it's just, again, it's more divide and conquer kind of mentality. They're doing to America now what they did in Iraq 10 years ago. They're trying to break the nation along factional lines, along sectarian lines, along like the old Dixie Union line. They're trying to do that. It's very clear that's what they intend to do. So we have to be aware of that. Be aware that our government has been hijacked, and that they're working against us. They're working against our nation. And the only way that we're going to get our nation back is to have this power removed. They have to be removed from the government, and they have to be removed from the media. Those two. We can't go on. We can't go on with this complete controlled media and completely controlled government.
Chris, this is Steve with AU Network, and thank you for sharing that information. That is mind-boggling with the Michael Moore connection, and actually fills some voids that I didn't know. So thank you for that information. And I can relate with what you're saying with the story of the woman, because the woman that was arrested for climbing up the flagpole was from my city, from Charlotte, North Carolina. Of course, it made front page paper here, but you're exactly right. What they're going to do is they're going to play that race card. They're going to play that race card. And
absolutely.
They're even defacing monuments, which this was part of American history. It was the Civil War.
Right.
So the monuments have the Confederate flag carved into them. So that's terrible to deface those. But they're making a big deal out of it. So you're exactly right. They're playing that to their advantage. They're playing that race card. Thank you for that information.
Yeah, because it makes no sense. It makes no sense otherwise. I mean, suddenly the issue, the media all across the board suddenly focused on the Confederate flag, on the old stars and bars, and its position on the Georgia flag or the South Carolina flag, and as if that's the issue, and then saying that then I can see that they're trying to say that the Confederate flag stands for slavery, that this is and they're conflating the whole history of the Civil War into this race question, which is wrong. But they're trying to break the United States into, again, they want to play this card. They want to play the race card. They want to get Americans to hate each other again. Along northern southern lines, along race lines, along religious lines, and they've been doing it very hard for like the last year or so with all these kind of false flag attacks where blacks are attacked or whites are attacked or, you know, but it's exactly what they did in Iraq, because the name of the game is basically, you know, divide and conquer. Put people against each other, and that's what they're doing.
Well, that's fantastic work you've done there, Christopher. I had a question for you. I wondered if you would ever read your book out loud, and then we set up and have people hear the story right straight from the horse's mouth. Are you interested in that?
Very much so. That's a very good idea. I just want to get the mechanism set up and do that. That sounds like a really great summer project.
That's great.
I Betty and I have talked about that, and Betty's on the line with us from Chapel Hill. And, you know, the problem is, Chris, is people are so pressed for time. I mean, they're having to work 2 and 3 jobs. So really, when somebody like myself, when they take the time to read your book, you get it. There's no other way you can get it. And then you have your accompanying book that goes with it, your articles, original articles that you did. You have everything documented that you start out from day one writing. So it's proof. It's proof that you've done with your research. It's undeniable. And you can research everything you've done in your book, which you showed that. But the thing is, to get people, for example, this archive, and so much thanks to Hummux for this doing this as well. But this would be an opportunity for people to archive and listen to this, maybe a chapter per call, and just go over that, and then say, hey, get the book because it's all in there. Then they have it documented. But it would be a way to really put in audio what you've already done with your dedicated and work. And marvelous.
Yeah, I will do that. I will definitely do that. We're working on a project here in Sweden. They want to do a little TV thing about my family and what my family went through with 9/11 and what happened to us there. And so we're going through all this, and it would be a good time for me to actually do that. And I will try to find out the best way that I can make this recording and just get good high quality recordings, and then find ways to get them out on the internet. But you're absolutely right. That's a good idea, because a lot of people don't have time to read, like you say, but they have time to listen to a recording in the car or something, or when they're driving or what have you. So that's a very good idea.
They can podcast as well. This broadcast can be podcast. And if anybody ever has a question about why Christopher left Hoffman Estates in Illinois, simply go to aunetwork.tv and click on the video with Fred Smart's interview with Chris back in 2000. And that explains it right there. I think Betty has a question.
Yeah, would that be doing a summary of each chapter to whet the appetite of the listener?
I would think that to read the whole chapter. I would think that the best thing would be.
That's what I would say. I would say he just reads the thing verbatim, and this could end up being a great piece, and have it available on Amazon as a book, and
an audiobook.
Listen to it on the way to work. Anyway, we're very interested here at 9/11 TV, Christopher, and so we're going to help you figure out how to get the high quality audio.
Good. Let's do that.
Yeah, that'll be great. One of the things I remember listening to you a couple of years ago, you had discussed some of the deep Obama connections in Chicago, and I was just fascinated with that. And I think this would be as good a time as any to explore that, because part of solving 9/11 is getting this information in front of the people so that everybody knows what the problems are. If you could go into the depth stuff in Chicago, and keeping in mind that Rahm Emanuel is now the mayor of Chicago, somehow he got from Obama to back to mayor, and Obama got put into office through the Chicago connection, as I understand it. Do you want to explore that for us?
Sure. Well, it goes back to basically understanding organized crime in America. If you understand that organized crime in America, what we used to call the syndicate, is not actually Italian, but is primarily Jewish at the top. That's the beginning. And the guys that ran the mob, have run the mob for a long time, are the boys from Lawndale, the guys from the west side of Chicago, from a little area called Lawndale. And this means that people like the Korshak brothers, Sidney Korshak and his brother, like Sidney Korshak was, if you remember the movie Godfather, there was a consigliere in the movie. His name was Tom. And in the movie, he was depicted as being an Irish German, of Irish and German blood, when in fact, the real-life character of Tom, the lawyer for the mob, was Sidney Korshak, who was this Chicago-born Jewish lawyer from Lithuania, I think, who went out to California and basically was the mob for the lawyer and the mob for Hollywood and the mob for a lot of other things, in the 50s and 60s and I suppose early 70s. And he was also, for example, so engaged in Hollywood that he was the consultant for the movie The Godfather. He's the one that got Al Pacino the role in The Godfather, and he's the one who advised them on, the movie. And he obviously advised them to make Tom, the consigliere, the lawyer for the mob, into an Irish German, when in fact he was a Lithuanian Jew from the west side of Chicago. Now, when we talk about Obama, you have to understand, of course, then that there's this unseen hand. Like I said, Sidney Korshak's brother was the right hand of Mayor Daley, the old Mayor Daley. I forgot the Korshak brother's first name, but he was the right hand for the Mayor Daley. Now his daughter, her name is also Korshak. She's the right hand for the current mayor. She's involved in the current government of Chicago. Now, what we have with Obama is that Obama was. I'm from Chicago. I'm from the Chicago area. I was born there. But when Obama was becoming created as a candidate, he was a non-entity in Chicago. He did nothing. He'd done nothing. He was not known. Nobody knew him. He was he had been elected into the state house down in Springfield, Illinois, and he was some sort of state senator from Chicago, from one part of Chicago down in the downstate. But he did nothing. He was a non-entity. I can't stress that enough. I follow Chicago politics. I mean, I live there, and I never heard of the guy. And then suddenly, there was this Fitzgerald. Senator Fitzgerald resigned. I think he resigned, and there was going to be a race for his Senate seat in the U.S. Senate. And there was Obama became a candidate for that. And that was like in 2004, I guess it was. And the Republican candidate withdrew in June of that year on some sort of infidelity or, sexual peccadillo or whatever. So it was only Obama. And this has happened before in Obama's candidacy, that he has been the only candidate running. So here we had somebody running for the Senate seat from Illinois, and there was only one candidate in the race. That was Obama. And then at the very last minute, like in September or October, that conservative black candidate from Maryland who ran for president before, I forgot his name, he came out and acted like a carpetbagger, kind of like a foreigner from, he came to Illinois and said, I'll run as the Republican candidate. And he actually got a lot of votes because nobody really wanted to vote for Obama, but Obama still won the race, of course, and became the senator from Illinois. But what happened, how Obama got to this position, again, he didn't rise, he didn't rise on his own merits, he was raised on his connection. Now, with Obama, we know that in 1992, a woman called Betty Lou Saltzman became his largest benefactor. And Betty Lou Saltzman is the daughter of Philip Morris Klutzman. Saltzman is her married name. She was a Klutzman. And Philip Morris Klutzman was, in the late 80s, he was the international president he was the president of the International Order of B'nai B'rith. This is the Elders of Zion in a nutshell. This is the secret conspiratorial group of Zionist Jews, men, who have this group called the B'nai B'rith. and it was created in New York City in 1843. It is now international, and it is a group where men who join it must be Jewish by ethnicity, and they must be Zionist by ideology. So there you have it. And he was the international order of this group, and his daughter, he was a millionaire, of course, a very rich man, and his daughter, Betty Lou Saltzman, presented Obama to her Jewish comrades in Chicago in 1992 and said that Obama will be America's first black president. And then what she did is that she hired Rahm Emanuel and David Axelrod to basically create the candidate, to shape the candidate, to create him, to educate him, to teach him how to talk, to teach him how to present himself, to teach him what to say, and all this kind of stuff, how to read off the teleprompters. And they created the candidate. And you could see it. You could see it that it was so clear when the election and when Obama was elected in to the Senate in 2004. I remember that on National Public Radio in Chicago that morning they said he's so presidential. He's so presidential. I thought, wait a minute. What do you mean? What's so presidential about it? He just won a race where he was basically the only candidate running, and you call him presidential. You see, the fix was in. This is how it worked. And so, when we see this connection, and this information I'm telling you comes basically from the Jewish press in Chicago. There's a newspaper in Chicago, I forgot what it's called, the Jewish World or something. And when Obama got elected, they had a front cover of their thing was, I think, called Obama, America's first Jewish president or something like that. They were very proud. The Jewish press was very proud of the role that the Jews had played in making Obama president. And it was, I've written extensively about it, but you have to understand that that's how Obama was created. And so that when people talked about change, and Americans were hopeful, progressives were hopeful that Obama would bring change, they were sorely disappointed to find that he didn't bring any change at all. Rather, it's the same old. He didn't close Guantanamo, and the war in Afghanistan actually was increased. Well, that shows you who's interested in serving. And I think that most Americans now are sadly disappointed in the Obama administration.
Remarkable. You've got a real handle on it, Christopher, and I'm glad to hear that. Steve, is there anybody out there in audience land that wants to speak up, ask a question?
Okay. We've got a few people, definitely a lot of people that's muted. *6 to unmute yourself, and if you'd like to jump in with a question or comment with Christopher, you're welcome to do so.
Kumuk, I wanted to say, if you can still hear me, that your video from Santa Rosa is doing very well, and there's also another video from Dallas, Texas, that was done on the same trip a little bit earlier, which is also doing very well. And so it's like I'm pleased to see that, because it shows me that people are interested in just the solving 9/11 message. They are very interested in that subject. It's the media, the organized, controlled media would have you think that 9/11 was a one-off event. It happened. It's done. It's over. We killed the bad guys. We fought the bad guys. We won, and we can all go to bed happy. But in fact, that's far, far from the truth. The bad guys have taken over the White House, and the bad guys are controlling our government and our media. And if we don't have this catharsis, if we don't have this national cleansing, this purging of our government, it will only get worse. We will only get engaged in more wars and worse wars than we've been engaged in the last 20 years. So that's why it's really absolutely essential that people understand that solving 9/11 and 9/11 truth is revolutionary, and it has to happen. I mean, this is a big thing. That's why a lot of Americans are very they balk. They're afraid to get involved in 9/11 truth. They're afraid to make their statements or make any come out and say what they believe, because they don't want to be. They're afraid of the government. They're afraid the government's going to take away. They're going to audit them. The government's going to take away their job. The government's going to take away their money. The government, people are afraid. But I mean, this is something that has to happen.
Absolutely.
I understand people. Yeah.
Absolutely, and also, if I could say too, Christopher, that the Pentagon, this was up on Press TV. I have it on the newsletter and also on RT News, that the Pentagon has a new document out, or one of their documents about how to handle a war situation, that press, a lot of the journalists are now considered unprivileged belligerents. In other words, they're saying journalists can be terrorists as well. So, this is what they're doing, and that's a scare tactic, just like Christopher correctly said. And they're trying to intimidate people to not try to research the truth and not to share it. But you're not being a worthy of being even a human being to simply sidestep this issue. And there's so many people that were innocently killed, and even more so, the casualties way supersede what was killed, the initial death toll on 9/11 as a result of the continuing lying and the wars and everything else, like Christopher said. So it's important to get the truth out.
But Steve, it's even worse than that. I mean, one way I put it is that, like, when they killed President Kennedy, it was a de facto coup d'état. The government was taken over, and things were done. The violent coup d'état. But what happened when they did 9/11, September 11th, it was very definitely a policy coup. When suddenly our policies were shifted radically, and our ship of state was hijacked. And it's like, we know, if we're like passengers on a big airplane that's been hijacked. And we know that the guys that are in the cockpit are not taking us to our destination, and we're way off course. And yet, some of the people, like in the first class cabin, are still enjoying their champagne and their lunches, and they don't really want to get involved. They say, well, I still got some good food here, and I got a bottle of champagne, so I'm not going to do anything. And people are afraid to do something, but they have to understand that our nation has been hijacked, and it's not going to unhijack itself. The hijackers are not going to take us anywhere we want to go. So it's absolutely incumbent and imperative that we do something, and that's what has to happen. It's like the United States of America for 200 years has not had a revolution. We're long overdue. And what's happened is that it slowly and surely over the last 50, 60 years, this foreign power has taken over all the levers of power in our government and in our media. And so we're living like in this bizarre reality where we think that everything's going to be fine. Somehow everything's going to be fine. Like the first class passengers on that hijacked plane. Well, if things are still good for me, I got my food and my champagne. But hey, it's not going to last forever, buddy. Those hijackers are going to do something to the plane, and you're not going to be one. You've got to do something about it. That's how I look at it. It's that serious, and it's that clear.
Exactly. It's time that we as Americans do what the French did after Germany went over and took over France. They got together, they discussed it, they shared it, and they actually took their country back. And so we need to do the same thing. Thank you, Christopher.
That's right.
Yeah, and that takes the leadership. There's leadership roles that has to go on to get the people organized, because many, many people will willingly do activities, but they have to be led. So I just hope that sometime we can start trying to get something at that level organized.
Well, you see, the thing is that the government has been preparing for this all along, and now I just saw this week they say that native-born American terrorists are a greater threat than jihadis, for example. And so when the police came to my house, they were all fired up. They thought that I was a militia, a neo-Nazi, blah, 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 blah. And they were all worked up. The ADL had given them a real story about me, and they came to my house and attacked me like I was a jihadi. And of course, the police that ran the operation had been military police in Iraq, so they just transferred their skills and their operation from Baghdad to Hoffman Estates, Illinois. But I mean, it's the government is very well prepared, or is making itself very well prepared to deal with exactly this. You talk about this Jade thing, this Jade operation that's going on, and this increasingly militarized police in America. They're prepared for it. And the closest thing we had to any sort of like altercation that could have led to a revolution was the Bundy place thing in Nevada, because there you saw there were Americans willing to come out there with their guns and face off against the federal government, and the federal government decided that they would retreat on that issue. They would back off because they didn't want to have a Bunker Hill. They didn't want to have a revolution starting. They weren't ready for it, but they are getting prepared. And so, how do we go about doing this? In your mind, you think that the only thing that could happen would be a military coup. You think that typically, what happens is that the loyal people, the loyal patriots in the military, lead the way, and the military, what has power and guns and everything, an organization, takes over the government and throws out the bad guys. That is how I think it would have to happen in America, because if the citizens try to do it, we would be shot down, I'm afraid to say.
But we can organize in order to educate.
Yes, that's what we have to do. Yes, absolutely. It has to be through organization of educating people and spreading the word. But at some point, action has to be taken. I mean, these people that have taken over our government are not going to purge themselves, and these people that have deceived us about 9/11 are not going to give up. So it's like there's a struggle, and there's a struggle that's going to happen, and it's got to happen. I mean, it's inevitable. That's all I can say. It's inevitable.
Well, I'm glad I'm a part of it.
Yeah, we all are. That's why we're truthers. And now we're going to be solvers. I want to put a little emphasis now on actually solving 9/11. We've got the truth about it, and we know that nanothermite was in it, but there's a lot of other bits and pieces that we have collected that we need to get out to the general populace of what pieces have been solved, and not be arguing about all different ways that blue screeners show you how the planes hit, or it was real, or who knows about that. But we need to find a way to get solving 9/11 out to the general public, so that we can encourage task forces to arise and solve 9/11, just like the murder mystery that it is. It could be an exciting time for our country to actually solve this problem, but most people don't even know it needs to be solved. What do you think about that?
Right. That's exactly right. That's the first thing I make clear to people when I first start talking about this in the presentation, is that they have to understand that the 9/11 crime was not solved, and furthermore, it was not even investigated. And you have to explain to them that the evidence from the crime scenes was all destroyed. So it's like, they don't understand that. And when you make that, try to make that clear, but it's kind of hard, because you're up against a lot of kind of like fossilized ideas people have, and furthermore, you're telling them something that does not gel with what they've heard from the mainstream media, and the real problem is in America, in my perception, is that the television has such a powerful impact on the people, and that the television has become a propaganda tool without equal, and the American people that consume television news are deceiving themselves every single day of the week. And when you try to confront them with reality, it's tough. They don't want to deal with it. And then furthermore, when you tell them that the government is behind this conspiracy and the media has been lying to you about 9/11, their first reaction is to reject what you're saying. They don't want to hear it. It's emotionally unpleasant. And even if you can prove, so you have to really lay out the evidence very carefully and very systematically, so that they can start to understand the level of deception, because the level of deception is huge. I mean, our nation is the United States is such a deceived nation. It's really a serious problem. So the first thing they have to do is they have to turn off their TVs, and they have to start opening their minds and read. But yeah, that's hard because people have TV addictions. Actually, they're addicted to the thing, and they want to believe they live in the freest nation in the world. They want to believe that their media is free and open. They want to believe these things. Yeah, you can understand that.
Right. Yeah, Americans think they're the free country around, but if you look at it in terms of the controlled media and what we're actually allowed to know, it's totally different than that. Television, as far as I'm concerned, is the single most addicting drug on the planet, and you're right. Yeah. Television is one of the reasons why people get so stuck on this stuff. It just goes straight into the brain.
Well, look at what they're saying in the NATO countries in America now about Russia, for example. They're saying that Russia is this new threat to the West. Russia is going to aggress NATO. Russia is going to attack these Baltic countries or whatever. But just wait, just think about it for a minute. What organization, what group has aggressed, a handful of nations in the past 10 years? Well, NATO has. NATO has aggressed Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Somalia. There's a host of countries where NATO has gone in and absolutely destroyed the nation and left the nation like a quivering mass of flesh, like Iraq or like Libya. They've completely destroyed nations, and yet they say, they point at Mr. Putin and say, look at that man over there, Putin. He's a real threat. Well, who's the threat to world peace? What group, what nations have aggressed other nations in the past 10 years? It's not Russia. Russia hasn't aggressed anybody in the past 10, 15, 20 years. Not since they went into Afghanistan back in the 70s has Russia invaded anybody. And the annexation of the Crimea was done completely legally and fairly and honestly. I mean, never mind the fact that 97% of the people of the Crimean Peninsula are Russian-speaking people, and that Crimea has been a part of Russia for a long, long time. And only in 1954 did Khrushchev, in the Soviet Union time, did the Ukrainian Premier Khrushchev, give that Crimea to the Ukraine. At that time, it meant very little because these were like internal state borders. But of course, when the Soviet Union broke up and Ukraine took away Crimea, it was a more serious issue. But when Victoria Nuland, our Assistant Secretary of State, when she fomented the Kiev Revolution and got the elected government of Kiev, of Ukraine, in exile, then it was a given. It was an absolute given that they were creating a civil war, just like they're trying to create now in the United States again with this whole Confederacy flag issue. And it's like I compare it to what happened in Canada. If the United States were to promote a coup in Canada, in Ottawa, and put an English-speaking, English language only government in power in Canada, there would be a revolution by the morning because the French-speaking Canadians would revolt. Well, they knew the exact same thing was going to happen in Ukraine because you had a third of the population was Russian-speaking, and that's what they're Russian-speaking people. So they created this whole problem, and now they've used the problem to increase fear in Europe, and they've dictated to every single member of NATO that they have to spend 2% of their GDP on buying weapons. Huh? And so they're parking B-52 bombers up here in Sweden and in the Baltic states, and they're gearing up for a war that is completely unnecessary. And I'm very, I'm really concerned about this lack of leadership in the Western states, because the Western states are now completely complicit in this criminal network, the Zionist criminal network that brought us the war in Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya, and now they want to do the same thing with Russia, because you see, that's all they can do. That's all they can do is make war, and unless we stop them, they will do that. So that's why it's really imperative. It's really urgent that we do something.
Isn't the main reason that they're upset over Russia is because of the BRICS plan that there is putting competition with the World Bank?
You bet. And now we have a big week coming up ahead of us. We got the end of the month in Greece on Tuesday, and it looks like the Greeks are going to have a referendum and these European potentates, these financial guys, are all protesting, saying, "Oh, now they're going to let the public decide. This is completely irresponsible to let the public decide." You know, Greece, who gave us democracy, is saying, "We'll let the people decide if they want this austerity plan that's being pushed on them by the IMF or not." You know, they're turning Greece into Argentina. They want, you know, I don't know where all the money went. I don't know what Greece's economic problems are, but Greece, they're trying to create a situation. But Greece is going to leave the euro, and Greece might very well join up with BRICS, you know, and other countries in Europe. That's an option. That's becoming an option. There's this, you know, there's this other way that they can go. They don't have to be tied to the banksters of London and Washington and New York. They can join in with this alternative, you know, non-aligned group. But what is it? Brazil, Russia, India, China, you know, South Africa. It's big, and so, you know, something's going to happen in Greece this coming week, and it's very big. You know, the euro project is feeling very, very skittish right now.
You don't hear a peep about BRICS on our media.
No, of course not. Of course not, because who owns the media?
Yeah,
you know,
I know.
That's the thing. It's the media. The media in the United States is so tightly controlled, it squeaks. It's worse than the Soviet Union. But you tell that to Americans, they think you're exaggerating. But you know, when I was in the States last time, when I watched CNN, I was in a hotel room watching CNN or Fox News. You know, it was not news. It was just propaganda, 24/7. And whatever the issue was at the time, that's all they talked about. That's all they talked about. And it was something to do with probably with Palestine and Israel and Gaza and so on like that. But it was amazing that it was so overtly propaganda and so in your face, so aggressive, especially Fox News, so absolutely aggressive. I can't understand how America let the media, you know, deteriorate in such a terrible condition that it is now.
Well, it's after 100 years of letting it happen. The Zionist movement's been going on for 100 years. It's not surprising it's as deep as it is.
Yeah.
So, do you have a few words you'd like to say on the revolution begins with 9/11 truth, just as a kicker on our way out here?
Well, I think that it's important for people to understand that solving 9/11, understanding what happened on 9/11, and understanding who is behind it and what the agenda is absolutely essential, because it's sort of like the Rosetta Stone, or it's like the key to understanding what is happening now on a day-to-day basis. We are, you know, it's now become a situation where false flag terrorism is the new norm. It is happening on a weekly basis. I mean, you know, we don't know what the next week's going to bring, but it's likely to bring another false flag terrorism attack, whether it's shooting at some school or God knows what, you know. And if you understand how this deception works and where they are trying to take us, where they're trying to take our nation and our world, then you'll understand that it is absolutely imperative that we understand the deception, we understand who's behind it, and that we resist it with every ounce of energy in our bodies. Because where they're trying to take us is no place we want to go.
Yeah, absolutely right, Christopher. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here and you taking the time to help enlighten us all. And we're just going to keep doing this until we solve 9/11. That's the way it's got to be. It's just a murder mystery that we're going to be solving here in the next few years.
Well, thank you, and I will do what I can to start recording these chapters and do an audio book. That's a great idea. Thank you for your encouragement on that. That's a great idea, and it's been a pleasure being with you.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, thanks so much. We'll talk to you next week or next month, Christopher.
Right.
Hopefully.
All right, take care. Thank you very much.
You betcha. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
AUN, American Underground Network.